Yeah, it's interesting that he said that, but he also said that they are not counting the days. So it seems at the moment it is open-ended. This was a press conference. He's still speaking now, a lengthy press conference, talking to, up to 40 minutes so far to Israeli media, interestingly, because it was for the domestic audience, but it's also angled towards the international audience, chiefly the Americans. It was American media who were invited to this press conference. So there are a couple of different messages I think that he was trying to get across and convey. One is that the war aims are achievable. There are strategic goals. They are concrete. There's no vagueness in this war, because that is the criticism. And we are now reaching an inflection point. And I think the other point that he wanted to make to the American public is that he did not drag Donald Trump into this war. This isn't Israel's war, he says. This is a war, and he coined it really in Manichaean terms of good versus evil. And this is a struggle really for good in the world. The barbarians are at the gates. There's a cost that must be paid if you have to have justice in the world. You can't be complacent about your future. So he coins this war really as Israel and America being on the right side of history when it comes to it. Now, going back to what those achievable goals are, he basically claimed that they can be categorized in three terms: destroy nuclear and ballistic weapons, because they are the chief threat to world peace and also to Israel, to eliminate the leadership, and he made it clear that as far as Israel was concerned, it's doing a good job of that. Remember, of course, the supreme leader's been taken out. Ali Larijani, the intelligence chief's been taken out. They've taken out the commander of the Basij and the intelligence minister as well. So they are managing to complete those goals. Now, this last one that he talked about was a little more vague, and it's talking about providing the conditions for regime change. But there's a contingency there. It's contingent on people in Iran being able to seize what he calls as an opportunity. It's quite interesting, though, listening to what he's been saying, because if you go back to what Benjamin Netanyahu said after the 12-day war in June, when he talked about the achievements, he's talked about the achievements that they've already done here. They've virtually wiped out, he says, the Navy, the ballistic missile program. They've gone after the factories, the Air Force, the Navy. After the 12-day war, he said that they had reached a historic victory, Israel had, and they had removed the existential nuclear threat from Iran. He said the missile arsenal was massively reduced, and he framed Iran as being strategically weak overall. Now, we're well into this war now. There's no end in sight. But, of course, we are seeing daily, not just here in Israel, throughout the day, we've had emergency alerts telling us to take shelter. There have been ballistic missiles coming in. Shrapnel from an intercept hit one of the oil refineries down in Haifa in southern Israel. And, of course, the Gulf is also being hit by a ballistic missile program that is still very much able to be used by the Iranians. So the question that lots of people will have after seeing this is really, how are you going to achieve these goals? You've stated that you're going to do this, but really to achieve this, can you do it from the air? There were questions about boots on the ground. He didn't really go into all of that. But many analysts I've spoken to over the last few weeks have said, really, to get to the core of all of this, you would need to send in a sizable force of putting boots on the ground. And that, of course, would lead you towards what they're trying to avoid, a forever war and an absolute bloodbath.
OK, Alex Rossi, thanks very much for that. All the latest from Jerusalem. Right, let's bring our panel in, shall we, for tonight? Broadcaster Nick Ferrari and Labour peer Baroness Luciana Berger. Thank you both. Nick, what do you think was the main message? I mean, we were talking a lot about Donald Trump not being dragged into this war.
Yes, an interesting line, wasn't it? He said, if anybody thinks you can drag Donald Trump, all your luck, effectively. Historical references, we heard Winston Churchill mentioned twice. Churchill said democracies suffer from their slumbers and they wake up when they hear the jarring gong of danger. Seeing danger in time is the role of the leader, and he praised the courage of Donald Trump's decision. I think what we heard was a justification there. He talked about the fact that if they hadn't moved, he believed that within no more than a year they would move these nuclear weapons underground. We can't allow that to happen. as we've just heard, he didn't put a timeline to it. I think what we heard is a justification. We heard about the close relationship between Donald Trump, how they are in lockstep. And one other thing which I found interesting, he said that he'd had conversations with dozens of other world leaders who are saying they are doing the right thing. We are fighting the fight for them, is what he said, and he claimed he had those conversations. A justification, a rationale, but no end game.
What do you think, end game? Is there an end game?
Well, I mean, I'd echo kind of what you heard in the assessment from your colleague in Jerusalem. I think what was quite important for people to hear that Benjamin Netanyahu say that he saw the war ending quicker than people think. I think that was important. I mean, that very much chimes with our own domestic priority to see a swift resolution to this conflict. Also, he indicated in the Q&A that the US is working very hard to open the Strait of Hormuz. And when a fifth of world oil production is going through that area and it's been closed since the 2nd of March. This is obviously absolutely vitally important because globally everyone is experiencing the shocks and the domestic impact on cost of living. So for many people listening, I think that will have been a key answer that people have been very much tuned into.
Yeah, and on oil, I mean, he was talking about spikes going up and down.
Yeah, I mean, the point he made there was that, yes, they are spiking, but he also said that, can you imagine what would happen to oil prices if Iran had gained nuclear capability? Can you imagine where the prices... And he was quite punchy when he said spikes go down. He addressed a reporter in quite strong terms. I think there were two audiences as well. There was obviously the international audience and the Trump, and there's a domestic audience as well, because he's talking about a nation of lions and lionesses. Our roar is heard all over the world. He talked about how people are going to shelters. He talked about how some of the schools have been closed. So he was playing to the domestic audience as well, because obviously he has to keep their support there.
Yeah, OK, thank you both. We will come back to you. We're going to stay with Iran tonight, and it can all seem quite abstract, can't it, when we're talking about oil and liquid natural gas infrastructure being hit thousands of miles away. But make no mistake, we are looking at an almighty shock to an already fragile UK economy. We might not feel it right now, but it will impact us. The cost of our mortgages, the cost of our energy, the cost of the food we buy. And there is, of course, politics too, pressure for the UK to protect itself. The government says that means a long-term green strategy, but Reform and the Conservatives say that we are sitting on a metaphorical gold mine in the North Sea. Well, we will delve into all of that on tonight's show, but first, here is our data and economics editor, Ed Conway, to explain the impact of what's been happening.
It kind of feels like pretty much every day there's more drama and news that obviously has military implications, human implications, but also economic implications for the whole world. And the latest of them, if we just look at the kind of map of oil and gas fields around the Gulf, so this is focusing on where the oil is. Look at this, actually, we'll zoom in. Look at this. This here, it's known as the North Field. Well, the Qatari part of it's known as the North Field. Now, why do I say the Qatari part? So that's a gas field, loads of gas there. In the sea, so that's in the middle of the Persian Gulf. And what's kind of interesting about this is that it's split between Iranian waters there, that's called South Pars, the Iranian bit of it, and then Qatari waters. But it's one gas field, and it's a massive gas field, and a lot of other countries around the world, including the UK, are directly or indirectly dependent on it. And so the fact that you've had these attacks on the Iranian facilities over there and also the Qatari facilities there, so that's Ras Laffan, the single biggest liquefied natural gas production site anywhere in the world, it's massive news, and it has implications elsewhere, and that partly explains why, if you look at what's happened to the gas price, it's shot up higher. So it was already up quite a bit after those initial attacks at the end of February, but now it's up, well, from there to there, it's basically up 99, getting on for 100%. So it's kind of doubled in that period. Really striking increase. Worth saying, though, if we kind of zoom out here and look back, going further back, this is the same data, but going further back. Now, all of a sudden, it doesn't look quite so scary, does it? So it's the highest since 2023. Certainly high, but it's not as high as it was during the kind of period in 2022 when you had the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But even so, look at the potential implications for the UK and for inflation. This is showing you inflation came down from that cost of living kind of crisis period where it was in double digits, down close to the Bank of England's 2% target. And up until all of this happened, most economists thought it was going to go down there and remain kind of, not that far away from 2%, and that would enable the Bank of England to cut interest rates. But now look at the latest forecast. This is from one group, Pantheon, and they are forecasting 4% inflation this year. OK, so that going considerably higher. And that makes sense because higher gas prices, that chart I showed you before was wholesale gas prices, but that eventually feeds into bills. Not right now, but later on this year. And you can see the moment it potentially feeds into bills in kind of July. That's a big deal. And part of the explanation as to why the picture for interest rates has really changed. Now, this is interest rates. It's the Bank of England's interest rate, which then has a bearing on what your mortgage rate is going to be, particularly if you have a floating rate mortgage. Currently, 3.75%. Up until all of this happened, feels like another world, doesn't it? But kind of, basically towards the end of February, analysts, investors thought there were going to be 2 more cuts this year. So down from 3.75 to 3.25. Now look at what's happened. Look at how much that's changed. They now think instead of 2 cuts, you could have 2 increases in interest rates this year. Complete change. And on top of that, so that's the big picture for interest rates and a massive shift, if you're thinking about your mortgage and getting it refixed, everything has changed, unfortunately. But then also a big change here for UK government borrowing costs. This is showing you the cost of borrowing, 2-year borrowing for the UK, for basically debt interest costs in the UK over the next 2 years. They've just gone up by one of the fastest rates that we've seen since the time of the mini-budget. So clearly this is not the same story, but it has a bearing on the government's debt interest costs, so it has a bearing on the budget. Final thing I want to just go through, you might be wondering, why does this all matter so much for the UK? And it does kind of matter a lot for the UK, and that's partly because, so right now, this is where our gas comes from, the gas that goes into our boilers, that goes into our power stations. Round about half of it from the UK, round about half from Norway, but quite a chunk, so 14%, comes in the form of liquefied natural gas, and that is the stuff that comes from Qatar. Not all of it comes to the UK, actually it's a small fraction from the UK, but it's the same market, the same tankers. But come 2035, we'll be consuming less gas, so the size of how much gas we need goes down, but 46% of all of our gas is due to come from liquefied natural gas. In other words, in the coming years, we are due to become even more dependent on those plants, exactly like the one in Qatar that has been under attack.
Well, Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative leader, has called for de-escalation in the war in the Gulf, saying she wants British bases protected and British gas and oil fields exploited. The Conservative leader spoke to our political correspondent, Rob Powell, as she launched her party's local election campaign.
We saw Israel yesterday hit the biggest gas field in the world. Is that a good idea?
Well, I don't know the reasons behind that. There is a war on. It's not for me to it's not for me to pronounce on whether something was a good idea.
But, I mean, do you support
I don't have
that?
the
Is that
operational.
something that you?
I don't have the operational details. I mean, the minute this conflict started, I knew that this was something that was likely to escalate. I've hoped that we can de-escalate. I want to see our British bases protected. If people are firing at them, I want to make sure that we protect them because we have put bases in other people's countries. We need to do everything we can to protect them. But the hitting of the gas fields and I think the retaliation on Qatar, this is going to have significant consequences for us here. So what we need to be doing is drilling oil and gas in the North Sea now. We have, we have some areas that are ready to go. Jackdaw, Rosebank, let's do that. I've been saying this for well over a year. Keir Starmer is wedded to this net zero ideology because of Ed Miliband, I suspect.
OK, let's bring our panel back in, shall we? Nick and Luciana. I mean, it feels like it's all obviously quite depressing, but it feels like we're starting to see the impact now. People are going to start to feel it with their mortgages.
Well, obviously not as a result of today's decision, but certainly the Bank of England have indicated that inflation might increase and there might be changes going forward. I think people will welcome the fact today that interest rates haven't moved, but certainly we need to prepare for what's coming down the line.
There was an expectation there would be a cut at some point.
Well, and I think for people watching this, the most important thing today that there hasn't been an increase, but certainly let's be very alive to the challenges that will be coming down the road, be that in terms of inflation or interest rates, and also thinking about our energy. I mean, I would challenge what you've just heard from the leader of the Conservatives in that actually what we need to be doing is producing as much as possible our energy domestically, and that's why I think the government's plans around clean power are important. We are an island. We should be doing everything possible to create energy that comes from natural resources, be that the sun or the wind. And why I think it's really important to insulate ourselves that this year we've seen the largest number of contracts awarded around offshore wind. I think that's really important. But there's obviously still a lot of things that we need to be doing.
Nick, you might want to comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting, this Iranian gas field, just to remind your viewers briefly, that was the one bit where perhaps there was a degree of contrition from Netanyahu. He said Israel acted alone and made it quite plain, because I think there is sort of growing condemnation if that was the right move. As to the position in which the government finds itself, look, I've got to be candid. If you listen to my listeners who phone in, they're going to say that so far the economic stewardship of this country has been at best questionable. There have been some strange decisions that don't seem to stack up. No chancellor, irrespective of whether they're Conservative, Lib Dem or Labour, would want to be faced with the potential consequences. You have to ask yourself, in the 18 months or whatever it is they've been, have they shown the sort of track record that makes us think they will be able to deal with this? And again, if you speak to a lot of the people who call me on the radio, so they would say no, they have not shown themselves to be that financially competent. And I think that is asking huge questions of over the coming months.
I have to say, a lot of Labour MPs I talked to, you obviously will know more about this than me, seem OK with how the Prime Minister has handled the war so far?
Well, I mean, we can look at actually what's happening in the wake of recent events. First of all, the things that are coming down the road that will insulate us from some of the challenges. So whether that's the introduction of the energy price cap, which switches on in 11 days' time, which will have a massive impact to households right across the country, or the measures that are coming forward specifically for our energy-intensive industries.
I guess that's what happens after July.
No, absolutely July, and of course. But I also listened very closely to the Chancellor, who said that they will make sure that this country is protected in terms of cost of living. There has been that focus. We've now got the new committee that's meeting on a weekly basis in number 10 that's being convened by the new peer, Richard Walker, specifically focusing on cost of living, bringing all those different issues together. The fact that we're also seeing action being taken around petrol, that the companies have been brought in. I mean, there is, if you look at each of the government departments in the wake of and in reaction to what's happened, they have seemed to be doing quite a lot, whether that's bringing in BP and Shell to think about the impacts on what's happening around the Strait or Hormuz, thinking about also what's happening around insurance to ensure that when things move, that we can actually protect people as well, and that we're doing everything to protect people both in this country but also externally and in other countries as well.
Do you have a bit of sympathy for the government, Nick?
Oh, huge. I mean, desperately difficult, making decisions at incredible lightning speed. I do say, and it's so easy for me as a commentator to say, I do think he's grown into it, but I would say his initial reaction when you had British military bases under attack and you had British citizens possibly under attack, to not allow the American Air Forces, United States Air Force, to use British bases as part of the protection of Britain. I thought that was questionable. No, I agree, no boots on the ground, not going into war, simply the protection of citizens and military personnel in the air. I think he was slow coming to that. And let's not even talk about HMS Dragon. I mean, that was shambolic by anyone's measure. When you had the Foreign Commonwealth Office warning Britons not to go to the region in December and we weren't readying any kind of battleship, that is very questionable. OK,
thank you both. We'll come back to you. Well, the government is keen to show it's not just a passive victim of the world economy, announcing 50% tariffs to protect the British steel industry. It raises questions about whether there's more that can be done to make the country more self-reliant. Well, a little earlier, I spoke to the government minister and MP for Aberfan Maesteg, which includes the Port Talbot plant, Stephen Kinnock. I mean, this is a massive thing, isn't it? The biggest increase in trade barriers imposed by the British government in a generation. More isolationist, inward-looking, is that fair?
It's a really huge deal, Ali. It's difficult for me to state how much this means to me and to my constituents. I've been campaigning on this for more than 10 years as the MP for Aberfan Maesteg. The steelworks is the beating heart of our economy and of our community. And the steelworks has not been able to compete on a level playing field because for years, countries like China, Vietnam, Turkey have been producing hugely subsidised steel in unfair market conditions and making too much of it, so overcapacity in the jargon, and dumping that steel on British markets. That's been pushing the costs down for the imported steel, making us uncompetitive. It's not a level playing field. It's absolutely right. This government believes in free but fair trade. You can't have free trade without fair trade. These rules are levelling up the playing field, and it's something that I hugely welcome.
But this is also about Britain being more isolationist, isn't it? I mean, where does this all end? You know, there's that quote, when goods don't cross borders, soldiers will. Does this take us to a worrying place if we're putting up barriers?
We are about protecting without being protectionist. We are protecting our strategic industry, the steel industry. Could anybody seriously argue that they think the United Kingdom should not have its own steel industry? We have to have that for our own national security, for our economy. It's the cars that we build, the houses that we live in, even the knives and forks that we eat our meals with. We have to have a UK-based steel industry. Port Talbot is the beating heart of that industry. You've got to be able to protect it from unfair, distorting market forces. If there are people out there that are cheating by deliberately producing more steel than is required with heavily subsidised industries, we cannot allow that to happen. So this is all this is about giving our steel workers a fair chance. They will fight for that chance and they will win.
I can see how passionate you are. And obviously, you know, this matters to you politically. This is your constituency. Why aren't we protecting the oil industry then in the same way?
Well,
drilling in the North Sea?
Well, I think this is about the dumping of steel. This is about deliberately distorting market practices from other countries, and that is all about having fair play.
But I suppose it's also about having resources in this country, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. I mean, look, you know, we are committed to continuing to have oil and gas in the North Sea. Oil and gas in the North Sea will be something that we need to rely on for decades to come. Gas is a really important bridging fuel through to renewables, and we've also got to recognise the importance of the workforce. But we're becoming increasingly
reliant on imports of oil from overseas, 46% by 2035, Ed Conway thinks.
There's a short to medium term issue here, which is about making sure that we have the energy that we need, and oil and gas plays a crucial role in that. There is a long term strategy which is about moving to renewables, because by doing so you are removing your dependence on the hydrocarbon states like the Gulf, even countries like Norway, where we're importing huge amounts of gas from Norway. We shouldn't be doing that. We need to have our own energy security. We need to be a country that can stand on its own 2 feet.
You know, you can build up your renewable resources while also building up your reserves of natural gas.
Absolutely. Got to do both. That means using the resources that we have in the North Sea, and we've committed to continuing with the licenses that are already in place, but it's also about getting that balance right and ensuring that we are investing in renewables.
Is the politics here a bit more tricky, I guess,
massive amounts of
than
jobs.
It is with steel when you have, you know, Nigel Farage leaning over? You know, do you worry that you'll be surrendering, in a sense, to Nigel Farage if you do new licences in the North Sea, unlike with steel, which politically works?
Well, when it comes to steel, Nigel Farage said we should turn the blast furnaces back on in Port Talbot. Doesn't realise it is physically impossible to reignite a blast furnace once it's been switched off. He also said we should reopen all the coal mines in South Wales. I've never spoken to a single South Walian who thinks we should be sending their children back down the coal mines. That shows how completely out of touch Nigel Farage is with the reality of what's happening in Wales. But on the point about our energy resources, of course it is crucial that we continue to use those resources that we have in the North Sea, that we continue to build our resilience and our capability to stand on our own 2 feet. But you also have to make that move to renewables, because that's the only way we're going to have independence and be a country that can stand on its own 2 feet.
And political news from home and abroad is sure to feature heavily on our late night programme, The Wrap, tonight from 10 p.m. Here to discuss all of today's big stories and the best of tomorrow's papers will be the Labour peer and broadcaster Baroness Hazarika and the journalist and commentator Henry Hill. Well, just 2 days ago, the Chancellor made clear she didn't want to turn back the clock on Brexit, but instead favoured a new and stable future relationship with the bloc. Now, the London Mayor has gone further, much further. In an interview with the Italian paper La Repubblica, he said, "I see on a daily basis the damage Brexit has done to not just London, but Londoners, the damage economically, socially and culturally. And I'm quite clear in terms of what needs to happen, which is I do think we should join the European Union." He went on to say, "We should, as a Labour Party, fight the next general election with a clear manifesto commitment. A vote for Labour means we would rejoin the European Union. I think that's inevitable." Well, asked about the Mayor's comments earlier on Sky News, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, Pat McFadden, said the government didn't want to return Brexit.
Well, when we fought the election 2 years ago, we said we wouldn't rerun the Brexit argument. There's no doubt that the Brexit deal negotiated by the Tories, which they said would be fantastic, has caused very significant cost and delay for UK businesses. We've been trying to address that through the new agreement that we negotiated with the EU last year.
OK, let's bring our duo back in, shall we? Nick Ferrari and Luciana Berger. Luciana, would you like to get back into... Do you think Sadiq Khan's right? Do you think we should be back in Europe?
Well, I was certainly a big campaigner, when it was we're talking about 10 years ago when we started campaigning to remain in the European Union, but I accept the results. And I might not like it, but certainly I think the Labour Party has been very clear that we are not going to see a return to the customs union or the single market or to freedom of movement. Those red lines have been set very clearly. They weren't in the manifesto, and that's where we've had many members of the Cabinet reiterate, as we just heard from the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions.
I mean, it is a bit... What do you think, Nick? It feels like there's a lot of freelancing going on. We had Angela Rayner a couple of days ago talking about criticising immigration. Now we've got this from the Mayor of London. Is there party discipline anymore?
I think there's always a degree of... There always will be within any major party, particularly one with that many representatives. There's going to be tensions. If we just take on... I don't see the economic argument from Sir Sadiq Khan, the London Mayor. Look, if we were looking at other European nations such as France or Italy and their growth was going through... It was just like a rocket taking off. I could see, but in reality, we're all, whether it be United Kingdom or other European, we're all kind of bouncing on the bottom. It was a shocking deal, as Pat McFadden said, no doubt about it. I don't see at the moment it's particularly helpful. I fully support what Rachel Reeves is trying to do. We do need a closer relationship with our European friends. I just think for now it would just bring a lot of pain, reopen still some rather raw wounds if we were doing it again. However, do I see it in my children or certainly my grandchildren's lifetime that a kind of reconstituted European Union? Oh, yeah, I can definitely see that happening, but I can't see the benefit right now.
It does feel like the Labour Party has quite deliberately turned towards Europe, perhaps not as far as Sadiq Khan suggests, but it feels like it used to almost be a bit of a dirty word, didn't really want to talk about Europe, fear of alienating voters. But do you think, you are sort of deliberately more open to Europe now?
I think deliberately the Labour Party wants to rectify the bad deal that was secured in the poor negotiation that took place under the last government. I mean, we heard an example today from one of our ministers that if you want to export pasta, it requires 25 pieces of paper. Now, that's completely absurd and ridiculous. And so there's lots of things we can and should be doing. Like, I'm looking very closely at the negotiations that are going on at this time to bring forward a limited youth mobility scheme. I think that's really important for young people in this country to have the opportunity to live, work and have education across Europe and to be involved in that cultural exchange. So I think there's lots of things that need to change. And already I think the Labour Party and the Labour government have shown that they have been able to negotiate differences. I mean, we've heard from some of our main supermarkets, including Asda, for example, that some of the new things that have been negotiated have made a tangible difference to bring down the prices of the food that we're buying in our supermarkets, but certainly more can and should be done. Now, does that mean a return to any of the three red lines that have been set out? No, I don't think that is. But we do have to acknowledge that there are many bodies, including the Office for Budget Responsibility. We've had seen research just out in the last few days that I think the Mayor of London was alluding to from a National Institute for Economic Research, along with Goldman Sachs. It has had an impact on our economy. Let's not pretend that it hasn't. But there are many things that we can and should be doing to rectify that, and I think that we can. And we've, I think, already seen over the last 18 months that action has been taken that's making a tangible difference. I'd like to see more.
Do you think that Labour are being more deliberately pro-Europe?
I think in a business, yes, they are. I mean, they're very careful. As Luciana rightly says, you have people like Pat McFadden and others saying, and people, Sir Chris Bryant on my show today, saying that, no, that argument is done. We're not, I think, to use their expression, we are not rerunning it. But they are right to identify it because there will be... I mean, I think if you look at young people like you, if you look at younger voters, you're certainly younger than me, there is a sense, and there is, I think, a growing sense that it was a terrible decision taken by older people that needs to be... So it's quite savvy, it's quite right that the Labour Party look at that. But that's also right that they sound a siren warning. Don't worry, we're not going to do it again. We've got other things we need to address. Much of what we've talked about today, actually, with this appalling oil crisis, they need to tackle that first before they ever think of having another referendum.
OK. Thank you both. Right, moving on. What have the Americans ever done for us? It is possibly a fraught question at the moment, but one US innovation that will be more than usually anticipated is the US version of Saturday Night Live. The comedy institution, a stalwart of the schedule for decades in the States, is launching in the UK this weekend. Tina Fey will host the inaugural UK version, and here's a little flavour of what's to come.
Tina, we love that you're here, but we're just trying to figure out how to promote the show.
Oh, no, of course. Why do you think I brought this?
I'm Tina Fey, and I'm hosting SNL UK this week. Why? Because I thought it would get me dual citizenship. It did not.
Is that why you asked us all to marry you?
Well, Tina Fey knows all about the inner workings of Saturday Night Live, having been a long-time cast member and head writer herself. More recently, she popped back to the US set for one of the show's oldest traditions, the political impersonation, playing the now ousted Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem.
Our government agents are working without pay. Luckily, my boys at ICE don't mind. They're in it for the love of the game. And how did I find them? By running ads like this. Do you need a job now? Yeah. Are you a big tough guy? Yeah. Tough enough for the army or police? No. But do you take supplements that you bought at a gas station? Daily. Do you like to use zip ties because people in your life don't trust you with keys? You know it. Then buckle up and slap on some Oakley's, big boy. Welcome to ICE.
OK, let's bring Nick and Luciana back in one last time. Are you worried, either of you, about... Actually, Nick, I suppose you're not a politician, so you're probably safe about being the victim of a political skit.
I can tell you that I lived in the United States for quite a few years when I was working over there, and it's a Marmite show. I've got to be honest with you. Sometimes it hits the spot, and sometimes... I mean, in those days, it used to be critiqued, obviously, on the Sunday and the Monday. I think even by their own admission, sometimes it doesn't quite hit the bullseye. Americans are used to that. I wonder how it's going to play here. I mean, there are certain things in its favour, for the love of God. I mean, we've got one party political leader who likes to throw himself off skateboards into the waters. We've got another party political leader who had all sorts of strange ideas about how he could make the female form improve by using mind power. I'll leave that there. So there's some... And if in doubt, go for Boris. That's always worth a smile. So there's certainly the characters there, but I would just warn, and you can bet loads of viewers of this show are definitely going to try. Give it time. Sometimes it doesn't quite hit the spot. OK, hit and miss. What do you think? I mean, you say we've got interesting characters, but, you know, we're not quite as dramatic as the Americans, are we? Fortunately, no. Sorry, Luciana.
Listen, I think anything that kind of brings politics to people in different ways is a positive thing. Yeah. And, you know, we should be able to laugh at ourselves and anything... Well, we laugh at you, don't worry.
Would you mind being in a skit?
No, not at all, not at all. I think anything that kind of, that does something different, that also kind of diversifies the television that we have and brings current affairs and politics to a wider audience in different ways. I think that's to be welcomed. I mean, I do think, you know, you may know that there's like an annual event where politicians will give a speech that takes the mickey out of other politicians. Now, that hasn't always worked out very well. But certainly, I think, you know, if comedians were to do it and to do it in a wider platform, I think that's easier. And again, you know, I think we're open to it. And
that was a golden age of spitting image and so on. But, you know, is US humour quite different to UK humour? It might have to adapt a bit. Do you think you'll get the tone right? Yeah, and I mean, I have to say, I think one of the great benefits of being British is that we can take the mickey out of ourselves like no one else. Exactly. I don't think the American humour operates quite on the same level of that. Maybe it's a little broader. So let's hope that it all comes down to the writers, doesn't it? Yeah. If they've got great writers, and you're right to remember, I mean, again, in its heyday, Spitting Image, you weren't even born, but in its heyday, Spitting Image was absolutely on point. It was hilariously fun. If they capture some of that, and remember great shows, people like Rory Bremner, John Bird and John Fortune, again, absolute institution on a Sunday night, I think, or certainly on a weekend night. If they hook into some of that, there's definitely an audience there. And does it need to be quite vicious to be effective?
Yeah. Oh, I imagine it will be. I mean, I do question the choice of Tina. I think she's brilliant, obviously, in the US context. I wonder how she might translate in the UK context. And hopefully she'll have had a kind of a fast track.
Do you think we're too savage with our politicians here? People say we're more, you know, we do more doorsteps, we're a bit more savage than they are in America. Do you think we need to be more deferential to our politicians?
I think the biggest issue is the stuff that we're seeing in terms of, to make it, you know, for a serious point, but the kind of misinformation and disinformation. So in terms of bringing something to our television screens that is actually a reflection of what's actually happening in the country. I think even in the comedic sense, that'll be helpful and constructive and be positive. So
I can see Nick shaking his head when I question whether we should be more deferential.
Well, you think we're rough here in a long and varied career in which I've been fired from some of the greatest jobs in journalism. I've also worked in Australia, and there they really go after their politicians there. They chase them down the road and abuse them. I want to see a bit more of that. That's a bit more fun when they do that.
I want to see as many people come into public life as possible.
Yes,
so I don't think chasing people down the road.
I guess does it foster a culture of cynicism in politics?
I think.
No,
I think that culture already exists. And again, I actually think bringing this onto the mainstream and actually talking about things in a factual, albeit comedic perspective is actually a positive thing. So, I'm worried about the other stuff that we see online, which isn't true and is fabricated or is AI or is just misinformation, disinformation, which is everywhere. So actually, I see this as a positive.
If we weren't cynical, we'd have to believe them. Can you imagine that? So it's quite healthy that they tell us one thing, they fail to deliver, and then tell us something else. It's going to breed a degree of cynicism, I think.
Thank you both. No cynicism on here this evening. Nick Ferrari, Luciana Berger, thank you so much, both of you. That's it from us. We will be back on Monday at 7 o'clock. Up next, the UK Tonight. See you soon.